Okay, so we're gonna get the development of digital lands.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Thank you for that. We have an agenda before us. Mr. Cameron, move motion to approve. All in favor?
Sir. Aye.
Item 6 is declarations of conflict of interest. I will pause for a moment for anyone to bring any forward. I personally have none, so on to approval of minutes of the audit committee meeting of June the 8th, 2023. Everybody read them? We're okay with them?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, motion to approve them. We're good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. So item 8 is delegations. Do we have any delegations, Stephanie? I don't believe we have any. So we will go on to item 9, and specifically item 9.1, the audit committee work plan. Just Natasha Charles, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So this is one of our standard items, and the work plan goes through the work of the audit committee, ensuring that the audit committee is compliant with the regulation 36110. So at this meeting, we've had information for section 9.2, which talks about the board's internal controls. As in closed session, we talked about both the reports from RIAT as well as from our own internal auditors. Section 9.4 talks about related to external auditors, and we have covered off the yearly performance review of our external auditors, as well. Our external auditors are present here today, and we will talk about the upcoming audit and the plan for the upcoming audit. So that will cover off section 9.4. And additionally, we are also covering section 11.1, which talks about the audit committee requiring to meet at least 3 times a year. This is our first meeting of 23-24, as well as there's a requirement that the first meeting take place no later than September 30th. So again, being September 21st, we have done that. And then in section 15.1, it talks about the audit committee having to submit an annual report to the board. Again, some of the items that are discussed today will form part of that report, which will be brought forward at the next audit committee, but things that will move forward are things like the IT asset management audit, as well as the legislative compliance report that we did review at I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Stan, can you put this on the floor, please?
I will, yes, sir.
Are there any questions regarding this report? Seeing none, can we receive this report? Mr. Senna?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, on to item 9.2, the audit planning report to the audit committee for the year ended August 31st. This is Mr. Trujani and Sony from BDO.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to present the audit plan for the August 31st, 2023 audit. I was to be joined by Josh Trigiani, my colleague. He had a personal matter come up today, so he sends his regrets. I'm going to go through this at a high level, as we typically do, since it was distributed ahead of hand and a lot of the material is similar to the prior year. I do always welcome questions throughout or at the end of the presentation, so please don't hesitate if you want something clarified or if you'd like me to dig a little deeper into a specific. I'm going to quickly scroll down to the 4th page of our report, the one that's got our pictures on it and our contact information. Just to reiterate that the lines of communication are always open, and we do encourage communication with our audit committees if any questions or concerns do arise at any point during the year. And off to the right-hand side on that page, just confirming our independence, which is a requirement for external auditors to be independent of any organization they are auditing. The next page is some key audit timeline dates. We did complete our planning and interim field work towards the end of July. The other dates on this letter that are important, we will be doing our final field work on October the 10th. We have our presentation today to this committee to present planning, and then our final presentation to this committee on November the 14th to share the audit results with you. We will also have multiple meetings with management throughout as we finalize the draft financial statements. I'm not going to cover the next page, auditor's responsibilities on the financial statements. That's there for information purposes. The next page is the auditor's responsibility with respect to fraud. Just a reminder that fraud is something that auditors are required to consider and to respond to in the event that it does occur. So it is something that we have some targeted procedures in our audit. As well, we will continue to discuss with management throughout the audit process to ensure that if there is any significant fraud, it is brought to our attention so we can respond accordingly. At this point in time, through our interim audit procedures, we are not aware of any items of fraud or suspected fraud that we need to consider in our audit approach. That brings me to the page on significant risks and planned responses, which is page 9 in our report. The 3 items you see on this page are standard risks that we raise each year. I'll walk through each one at a high level. The first is the complex IT environment. Any organization that has a complex IT environment, that creates additional risk. As a result, we bring in our IT audit team. They look at the controls around your system and your IT environment overall. It includes reviewing application, security, access, and change controls. Really, the crux of this is we're relying on information coming out of these systems. And for us to rely on those numbers, we need to be assured that the system is functioning properly and producing reliable information. The next item is grant revenue and grant receivable or any related deferrals as well. There's always a risk in this area with respect to revenue recognition. We do confirm all funding with the ministry. If there's any significant deferrals, we do review those deferrals to ensure that there's appropriate basis for those deferrals. Lastly, on this page, management override of controls. This is a risk in every audit we perform, so this is not unique to the board. There's always a risk that management can override internal controls. This can happen either intentionally or in error. As a result, the procedures that we incorporate into our plan include reviewing journal entries, especially those in the course of preparing the year-end financial statements. If there's any significant transactions, we'll review the accounting for those transactions to ensure there's no underlying bias in how they have been recorded. And we will also review significant accounting estimates again to ensure that there's no underlying bias in how those estimates have been recorded. On to the next page. The top 2 items are fairly standard risk. Payroll is a risk due to magnitude, obviously being by far the single largest expenditure of the board. And we do a test of controls, testing the internal controls around the payroll processing, and we supplement that with analytics. And then capital asset acquisitions is a risk just due to the magnitude again, that obviously varies year to year. Asset additions, we do substantive work as well as looking at the controls around capitalizing versus expensing items that may be in that gray area of capital versus expenditure. Next, we have a couple of areas that are new this year, so I'm going to spend a little more time on these. The first that you see on the bottom of this page is Bill 124. This is a bit of an unknown at this time, but we still wanted to bring it to your attention because we will be reporting the results of this at our November meeting. So as most of you are likely aware, Bill 124 was a piece of legislation enacted in 2019 by the province that capped public sector employee wage increases to a maximum of 1% per year over the 2019, over a 3-year period starting in 2019. It was struck down as unconstitutional on November the 29th, 2022. And as a result, there is a potential that back wages may be owed to employees who had their wages frozen during that period as a result of the bill being deemed unconstitutional. We have requested, not just BDO, but all of the large auditing firms, direction from the Auditor General's office on this issue because it is something that A, is complex and B, will apply to all school boards and has to be applied to each audit, which are rolled up into their provincial consolidation. To date, despite multiple follow-ups, we do not have a conclusion from the Auditor General's office yet. Just to give you a little bit of context, there are differences based on how the collective agreements are written that could result in an accrual versus not an accrual. For example, the hospitals did have to accrue. They're a March 31st year end. They did have to accrue because they have what is called remedy clauses in their contracts that basically stipulate if the bill was to be deemed unconstitutional, this is what would happen, including retroactive pay. Colleges, on the other hand, did not have to accrue because their collective agreements did not have similar clauses. They had reopener clauses that simply just said, if struck down, we will both go to the table and we will collectively bargain a solution. So kind of depends on where you're going to fall. It's an unknown. It will not be material, but it could be a significant number to accrue, and we will have to defer to the November meeting to update you on the conclusion at that point. Any questions on Bill 124 before I move on? Okay, so I will move on to the next page and the next new item, which is a new standard that's in effect this year end. PS 3280 asset retirement obligations. We have spoken about this in past meetings to prepare you for it. Essentially, this is a standard across the broader public sector that requires you to accrue for the future costs associated with the retirement of a tangible capital asset where there is a legal requirement to do so. In the case of school boards, really the only significant item we're seeing is asbestos. So for buildings that were built 30, 40 years ago that are still in use, asbestos is a substance that was used as an insulative construction material up until 1986 when it was officially banned in Ontario. But if there's asbestos within old buildings, you're actually required to estimate the cost to remediate that asbestos at whatever point in time you either demolish or renovate that building. And you need to bring that back to today's financial statements and accrue that cost in your financial statements. So it is a fairly complex standard. There is a lot of estimation involved, as well as looking to the assistance of environmental engineers and helping determine the potential cost to remediate those liabilities in the future. And then from there, management must determine the expected remediation date, as well as some other inputs that ultimately drive the liability that will be recorded in the August 31st financial statements. We expect the number to be significant, but not material. Questions on this new standard before we move on? Okay. On to the next page, our audit materiality has been preliminarily set at $40 million, which is based on 2% of expenditures. For your information, benchmarks for materiality in the public sector tend to range from 1% to 3%. So we're smack in the middle at the 2%, which we're comfortable with. The next number of pages I'm going to skip over for the most part. The dark gray pages provide information on our audit tools, and our audit process. They're similar to prior years. There is one that I will quickly talk about on page 14. There's a new auditing standard, Canadian auditing, which is requiring us to approach both the IT audit as well as our risk assessment from a new perspective. So that is an additional item this year. The good news is it's one of those items that once implemented, sort of carries forward into future years. So there will be some additional effort this year, both on BDO's team as well as the board's IT team. But once we have that documentation maintained in our files. Lastly, I will just scroll down quickly to page 20 of our report, the page numbers being in the bottom left corner, which is a little more information on the asset retirement obligation standard PS 3280. I know it's complex, and just in case you're sort of getting your teeth into it now, this is a good high-level summary of what's involved in implementing the standard. And then the next page that follows it talks a little bit more about what's involved and how management has prepared for the implementation of this new standard. Finally, we have two appendices, the engagement letter, Appendix A, and the PSAS update, Appendix B. The PSAS update does talk about the asset retirement obligation standard. There is a lot of change happening in the public sector accounting world right now, so we will keep you apprised on any significant items as we move forward into future audits in 2024. With that, I will open it up to any questions. It sounds like there's none. Right. Thank you.
Can we put this on the floor, Trustee Cameron?
Yes, I will.
I guess we might as well receive it as well. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. We're on to item 9.3, and that is the Peelschools School Board Regional Internal Audit Update and Annual Report. Back to you, Paula.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, the agenda item 9.3 is our regular RIAD update on the status of planned engagements and other things we have underway. As well, it also includes the RIAD annual report covering last year. So as you know, we completed 2 of the 3 engagements outstanding from previous years. The other is the guidance counselor audit. I presented an update at the June meeting, noting that this engagement had been deferred until the fall. So we do hope to be able to resume that shortly. The current year engagements are included and referred to in the RIAD annual report. So beyond the planned engagements, I do have a couple of other things to share. First, we do have our follow-up activities. We have sent management our register of findings and recommendations from previously issued reports in order to get an update on these findings. So once I receive this information, I will provide a summary on the status of management's action plans. This update will also be used to identify follow-up activities that our team can undertake this fall. Now, as we included in our annual report, our goal is to conduct a minimum of 2 follow-up engagements at each board this year, but we do hope to exceed that as well. There is a transportation follow-up that is currently underway. I've also prepared the RIAD annual report, which has been added as an appendix to the update. This is something that we are sharing annually with each audit committee in the region, with some customizations for each board. The purpose of the report is to help us better conform to internal audit standards, as well as the regional internal audit charter, by communicating some necessary information. So this annual report is on page 3. It's similar to the one that we produced last year with some additional information this time. So it covers some information and activities from last year, including required communications. And as well, as part of the report, we have included planned engagements for this year. So I won't go through the whole thing, but I did want to point out just a few things. So the first is the RIAD charter that is referred to at the bottom of page 3. So this was presented back at the March meeting. And the next step is to have this charter signed by myself, the director or a designate, and the audit committee chair, as we'll need to have a signed copy for our records in advance of our external quality assurance review that will be happening later in the fiscal year. So a copy of the charter has been included as an appendix to the annual report on page 7, and we will do this every year going forward as a refresher on our purpose and mandate. So at the bottom of page 5, new to the report this year is an update on our quality assurance and improvement program. So as we plan to do an external assessment in the next year, we started the process by conducting an internal readiness assessment. So out of the 52 internal audit standards, we noted that we were in conformance with 36 of them, partial conformance with 8, and non-conformance with 1, the non-conformance relating to getting an external review, which we are planning to do. For the 9 cases, there were also 7 standards, not 8 that I included in the report, that are not applicable to the REAT. So for the cases of partial conformance or non-conformance, we've outlined 6 action plans on how we intend to achieve conformance, and that is included in Appendix 1B. So as well, in addition, although not required to achieve conformance, we have also developed some internal action plans not included in the report, with one of those being to work on decreasing the time we take to complete an audit and issue the report. Finally, on page 6, I note that cybersecurity and recruiting, hiring, and retention are the 2 engagements included in the plan for the current year. Given that it's the 2nd year of our plan, I just want to make sure that the committee has no concerns with going forward with those engagements. Those engagements were based on a risk assessment that took place last year, and I feel that they do address risk areas that I feel are still relevant, not only to the board, but sector-wide. So that concludes my update, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
It's on the floor, Trustee Cameron.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. It is now on the floor. Any questions regarding this report? I do not see any. So let's move right to receiving this report. Mr. Senna?
My pleasure, Mr. Chair.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So now we are on to item 10, committee member motions for consideration. I didn't receive any. Item 11, committee member notices of motion. I did not see any of those either. And so, Trustee Cameron, will you motion for adjournment?
I will.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry.
Before we adjourn, could I do something forward?
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to make the committee aware that one of the team will be leaving the board, and that's Carlo Olio. And so I thought I'd acknowledge his hard work and dedication to the Peel board, to his work at the schools, to his work with standards and reviewing standards, and also with the whistleblower policy that he was involved with over the last 13 years. And at this time, I think he is also on the chat here, and I would like to thank him for providing through the team to the Peel board.
Thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, with that in mind, stand adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.